Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and today I wanted to talk about buffing the Death Knight hero cards from the Frozen Throne. People get nostalgic for cards that they used to play back in the day, and I get asked a lot on stream, Martian, what would you do to buff this card to see play today? Easily the most frequent target for that question is somebody's favorite Death Knight hero card from the Frozen Throne. And I actually love all of them, so it's a question I really like answering, and I thought maybe I'll just do a YouTube where I go through all of them and adjust them in such a way that they could see play in Wild. So the context to where we've seen stuff like this happen is specifically for Twist. So we had the Caverns of Time expansion go back and buff a lot of older cards, and then later, as part of Twist, Ungoro was updated to have its power increased when it was added to that Twist format as well. Those cards, however, were not buffed to be good in Wild. They were buffed to be good in Twist. And so we saw a lot of very conservative adjustments in that set. For example, Elise the Trailblazer had this really cool buff where you would actually draw the pack if your deck was Highlander. And that was a really cool Twist specific change, but playing a 5-mana 5/5 that gets you a 2-mana thing with a bunch of random value in it isn't going to see any play in Wild, right? If you wanted to push that for Wild, you'd probably put it to be a 4-mana 3/5 like the previous Delise and give it Taunt or something. So the reason I'm saying all that is my buff ideas for these cards are going to come from the perspective that this would only happen if they were going to do a Frozen Throne Twist, and I want to push them enough that they could be considerations in Wild, but not so much that it would be too much for whatever Twist format that would be. I also have no way to test this out in advance, so some of these might be a little bit pushed on the power level or maybe a little bit conservative, but it's just fun to talk about. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, first up here, we have Malfurion the Pestilent for Druid. This one was actually played in all slower Druid deck lists right up until Guff came out. Guff kind of invalidated this card because the hero power on Guff is so much stronger, right? You think about the new card Invigorate, choose one, draw a card, or ramp. Guff's hero power is that card. So it's strong enough to be a straight to Wild card as its hero power. And then you think about Malfurion's hero power. For 2 mana, you're dealing 3 or gaining 3 armor. That's not a card that would see any play. Comparing it to Harmonic Mood, which is double the value of whatever card that would be. So yeah, you want to be drawing and ramping with Guff, and turning into Malfurion the Pestilent after you've done that just isn't doing much for you. So it's really tough to buff this one and have it actually see play in a slower Druid deck. Something I would compare this to as far as like how we're going to target this is Demonic Assault. So Malfurion the Pestilent, you typically play it to gain some armor for defensive reasons and put up the taunts to keep them off of your face. So Demonic Assault kind of does that. It deals 3 damage and it makes 2 1/3 taunts for 4 mana. Malfurion is 7 mana, but it also comes with that hero power. The taunts are a little bit bigger. You have the option to make them poisonous with smaller stats instead, and you get the 5 armor, but armor is typically worth a little less than damage. So cards that give you armor are likely to give you more armor for the same cost than it would otherwise do if it dealt damage. So if we think about, could Malfurion the Pestilent cost 4? 4 mana, gain 5 armor, get 2 1/5 taunts. Comparing that to Demonic Assault, which deals damage, which is more valuable, and is only barely playable in Wild even when it first came out. That mostly sounds okay. The issue is Questline Druid, which is the only place that you would really expect this card to see play, because it's the only Druid deck that's really not running the hero card Guff anyway. And then it would value being able to press the hero power for 3 damage instead of the 1 that it normally gets 2. So that sounds like a really disgusting card to have on curve in a Questline Druid deck, and we've already seen that archetype kind of pushing the boundaries a lot recently. So all that is to say, I think the best we're expecting for this card is for it to be a Questline Druid card, and at 5 mana, that doesn't seem as gross to me, and it's also strong enough that you could almost consider it, just if you miss this card, to play it in a slower druid deck defensively. So anyways, I think 5 mana is the change that I would make to this one. Next up for Hunter, we have Deathstalker Rexar. This one is the one I'm most excited to buff because I think it's one of the coolest cards ever printed in Hearthstone. It's beloved by everyone, offers a really fun experience. Building a beast is just so cool. Those customizable effects and having access to that kind of repeated value in Hunter is kind of rare. This is also my wife's favorite card outside of Snowflipper Penguin. I actually got her to play Constructed pretty regularly for a while just because she had this card and she could build beasts. But it's got a lot of things going wrong for it. So first of all, the battle cry, the 2 damage breakpoint is kind of a whiff. Even some of the ones that are starting to be well costed for doing 2 damage, like Heatwave, just aren't cutting it. You need to be able to deal 3 to deal with a lot of the 1/3 threats that are out there. So that 2 to 3 damage breakpoint is really important to hit, and this is not hitting it. And for not hitting that important breakpoint, 6 mana is too much. So this is a slow card, it doesn't hit the right breakpoint, and also the Zombeast, you have to spend 2 mana up front to then build what is probably an expensive card, and it's a bit random, so it might not have the rush or the taunt or the lifesteal or other effect that it needs in order to impact the board immediately. So I think a lot has to change about this card for it to see play in Wild. I do think that the Battlecry dealing 2 damage is meant to reference the Hunter hero power. They have very similar animations. It's just hitting all of the minions on board instead of the opponent's face. But I still want to change it. So the first thing I would do to this card is up the damage from 2 to 3. Once it deals 3 damage to all enemies, it becomes a one-sided board clear. It is very likely that at least against aggro, you're going to be clearing the whole board with this card. So can we change it to 5 mana instead of 6 mana once it deals 3 damage? For Wild specifically, I would say almost certainly you could, but if we're releasing this in a twist format as well, I think that's pushing it. I would say change it to deal 3 and then leave it at 6 mana, and then that also preserves it for Even Hunter, which some people have nostalgia for. And then finally, the hero power needs to be better. So I think that preserving the 2 mana investment up front is ideal. We want you to have to be able to choose to weave in that hero power, but the beast itself I would want to discount. So especially if we're leaving the card at 6 mana, I want it to discount the beast by 2, because you're playing it at 6 and then you're hero powering the following turn to get a like semi-random, stat pile. So in order to stay in the game, I feel like this needs to be pretty playable, but I also feel like a 2 mana discount is possibly going to be too much. Like, we might see much too consistent Tundra Rhino lethals if we're able to build these custom beasts with that reliably. Honestly, I think that's pretty cool. I would like to see like Bunny Hopper and Tundra Rhino plays with the Deathstalker beasts, so I kind of want to push it to 2, but at the very least, I think this hero power needs a 1 mana discount. Next, we have Frostlass Jaina, which is one of the ones that gets brought up the most. I think by today's standards, this is the one that's the most overcosted for what it does. Even at the time, I felt like 9 was just slightly too much for this card. It was playable because all the Death Knights were pretty playable, but it fell off faster than all the other ones that were good. Comparing this to Magister Dawn Grasp, what is it offering that Magister doesn't do way better? So I think at the very least, we got to make it cost 7. And even at 7, I think Magister is just a way better card. If you're playing it at 7, you're getting a 3/6 water elemental that does have lifesteal and freezes, but you're relying on your opponent to trade into that for you to get any immediate value, and they're probably just going to be going straight for your face. And the hero power is really good, but it doesn't pressure the opponent's face like the Magister hero power does. It doesn't scale like that one does. And it's very reliant on your opponent to be playing specific stuff out for you to get the actual value out of it. So at the very least, I think this could go all the way to 6. The more I talk about it and think about it, the more I kind of want to push it to 5. But we're releasing this in a hypothetical twist format, so I don't think we do that. But I think at 6, for me personally, it would be very playable enough for me to shove it in a bunch of funny Reno decks. Next up for Paladin, we have Uther of the Eban Blade, which is one of my favorites. It's always like looked really cool, and it does a lot of effects that I really like. So I like the very late game OTK win cons. I like the big health swings. It's just a really fun card to me. So I would like it to be a lot more playable than it has been. 9 is so much mana, but its effects are kind of inherently such that you don't want this to cost too little, the weapon itself is just such an extreme life swing. And while I think that 9 has been an incredibly conservative mana cost for this card, even from the onset, with regards to the hero power, you don't want this hero power to be too good because it is just winning the game on the spot. So for this one, I think the mana cost change is between 7 and 8. 7 if we want to like push it, and 8 if we want to be conservative with it. For me, I like the idea of pushing it. I like the idea of putting it at 7. I wouldn't put it at a mana cost lower. And even at 7, we're already considering maybe taking a durability off of the weapon. But I do think that this is a really cool card. I would love to just jam it on 7, heal a bunch, and start pressing my win button. So yeah, definitely 7. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Then we have Shadow Reaper Andwin for Priest, which is easily one of my favorite cards of all time, and a bit awkward as far as being a buff target. I'm buffing all of the Knights of the Frozen Throne Death Knights, which is why I'm even talking about buffing Andwin. But even though it's in one of my favorite Hearthstone decks ever made, I'm still pretty hesitant to buff this just because it's been so relevant for so long. It fell off pretty hard after Raza got changed, and then ever since Raza got its nerf reverted, it's been a format staple outside of Year of the Griffin, which kind of had a dramatic fundamental change on the wild scene for that year. But anyways, the point is, this has been very relevant for a long time, and even to this day, it's already within kind of the target zone of, if you want to play this, you could. So how much do we want to push this? Honestly, do I think a 6 mana Anduin is going to break wild? Probably not, but it just doesn't need to, you know what I mean? So what I was thinking would be my pick for this card is to change it to 7. So 7 makes it a little bit faster to come down, makes it not as obscenely worse than the new neutral Reno hero card, and makes Raza and Anduin both odd, so you could play a funny Baku Highlander Reno Priest and also have the funny hero power. But that really just felt like a change for change's sake to me, which was fine enough. But I actually, upon further reflection, came up with a change to this card that I think would actually be kind of cool, and that's to the battle cry. So change the battle cry from destroy all minions to destroy all enemy minions. A lot of cards like this are getting the one-sided board clear treatment these days, and this is already a pretty niche clear. So it's expensive at 8 mana, and it only gets rid of your opponent's biggest threats. If your opponent has a bunch of small threats out, it doesn't clear anything at all. So considering it's already a bit of a niche clear by today's standards, I think it could target all enemies instead of all minions, period. And that way, you're not destroying your own Raza, destroying your own Behemoth when you play this card. So that is the change I would make if I had to make a change to Anduin. Next up for Rogue, we have Vala the Hollow. So this is another card that I really like, but it's also probably the most terrifying of any of these to buff. If this card is good, we're all going to be miserable. So anyways, what would I put it at if I wanted to make this card better? I think no lower cost than 7. And even then, 7 feels pretty accessible for this. I almost want to say we take 1 mana off it and call it a day, but this card is so strong, like just giving you the armor and the stealth and then free infinite value. I would rather have this cost 8 and Scabs go back to 7 than push this to 7, if you know what I mean. And I'd be happy to make both of those changes, but I think pushing Vala the Hollow too far is just obnoxious. So 9, definitely too expensive. 8, I think it's much more playable and you start to consider it and things. And starting at 7 or 6, you know, we're gonna hate this card. So 8 seems about perfect. Then for Shaman, we have Thall, Death, Seer. So with these, I'm coming at it from the mind that I'm adjusting these with the spirit of how they are to be more modern playable. I would like to fundamentally change this card and turn it into a freeze card, because I feel like that's what it was always supposed to be, you know, like visually and with the set theme, and also with the package that Shaman got in that set. I had heard a rumor that that was the intention, and it was last minute panic changed because they thought it was too uninteractive and obnoxious, which sounds super believable and also probably the right call. But ideally, I'd like to change this card completely and have it be a freeze card. But I'm not going to do that because that is not within the spirit of what I'm trying to do in this video. So this card is what it is. What would I change about it to have it see play? I do think that its mana cost is mostly fine. I think if we were going to change its mana cost to have it be like a really good card. But what I'd want to do is change it to 3 so I could play it and the hair in the same turn on 6. And that would be really busted, right? Like, you know, just stuck a few minions on 1 and 2, or you played your hair on 3 and it's stuck, you know, like there would just be a really obnoxious play pattern. So I'm not trying to push the initial card. From playing this myself, the area of this that I think needs the most improvement is the hero power. So Transmute Spirit transforms a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more, but it's always felt like I run out of gas, like this isn't helpful to me. If you think about the type of minions you're trying to buff with evolve effects, they're like Doppelgangster, Desert Hare, things that make multiple stuff. So when you have an expensive 2 mana hero power doing that to just a single thing, it's not really that useful. You run out of gas, you play your Desert Hare, evolve one of them by 1, and the other 2 are 1/1s. It just doesn't have a lot of impact. So what I want to do is to have this transform a friendly minion and its neighbors into a random one that costs 1 more. So that way when you top deck your Hare or your Doppelgangster, you're going to get to evolve all 3 of them. Then we have Blood Reaver Gul'dan, super iconic Death Knight. If I had to pick one, probably my personal favorite. What would I change about this card? Well, the first thing I would change about it is I would print more good demons to summon, because I feel like we haven't had worthwhile demon updates in a long, long time. But that's a separate thing. How would I change this card? It is as simple as just moving the mana down. The hero power is good. The effect is good. It's just so late now. You know, you can't expect to get to 10 mana in Arena Lock anymore. I do think we could probably push this as low as like 7 or something, maybe even to 6 if we're like really brave, because the amount that this is good is very dependent on having had the game play out in a certain way. But I think more than that making this better, that would make the high rolls with it more disgusting. So I don't think we need to push it that far. I like pushing it down to 8, because 8 is still pretty late game. You have to have played the demons, had them die, kept yourself alive, which is the spirit of how this card was played before. But it's just not so ridiculously far off at 10 mana. You can play it at 8. It doesn't feel strictly worse than the new neutral Highlander card. And you can still play it in even decks, which it saw a lot of play in both Highlander and not Highlander. So 8 mana seems perfect. And finally, we have Scourge Lord Garrosh, which I think is one of the trickier ones. Shadowmourne is a really good weapon, so you don't want to have that cost too little. I feel like in its current form, you could almost push it down to 4. You know, like the hero power is real bad. But at 4, you're much more likely to be able to get use out of it. You know, like the minions are still small, it came down while you were still alive, and you can like set up executes and stuff with it, and it might be interesting. But like the weapon is so brutal at that stage of the game, right? Like if you play this on 4, you keep your opponent off the board for 3 straight turns. So just in relation to the hero power, you know, what stage of the game do I want that to be live? You know, really early on is what I want. But also Shadowmourne is brutal when it's too early. I also think that Shadowmourne and Bladestorm have a little bit of anti-synergy. Like Shadowmourne is a big, strong board clearing tool, and Bladestorm is like a weak sauce tiny board clearing tool. So you've already cleared the board with Shadowmourne. What is your Bladestorm doing? So anyways, this card has a lot of stuff going wrong with it. I had heard that they were considering putting Lifesteal on Bladestorm or something like that, and they took it off because they thought that would be broken. And even today, I'm wondering, is it gross to have Lifesteal on this just because it makes your opponent sad to put out their own minions, you know, because they're just healing you. You do your Spirit Lash every turn and then clear with one of your clears, and your opponent has just gained a bunch of health for you putting out minions. So anyways, preserving the spirit of this card I think is a little tricky. For the mana cost, considering the weapon, I don't want to put it any lower than 6. At 6 is a weapon like this too much, especially considering all the Zephrys around and how easy it is to put a Viper in your deck and the prevalence of stupid Sticky Finger in everybody's ETCs. I want to say it's not too much at 6, but maybe 3 durability is too much at 6. So I want to push it to 6, and if we need to take a durability off of Shadowmourne, we'll do that. But my guess is it's fine. Then we got to look at the hero power, because it is like so lame. It's almost lamer than the shaman hero power, and that's saying something, I think, because transmute is pretty bungus. Do I want to put lifesteal on it? No, I don't think that's good with the hunter theme, and I do think that it's either going to be useless or really unfun to play against. Maybe at the time it could have had lifesteal thematically just because lifesteal was new as of this set. But now we're pretty used to having lifesteal around and it just doesn't fit in Warrior at all. So there are a couple things that I've thought about for this. Refreshing when it kills something, reducing the cost by 1, and gaining armor every time it kills something. So like if your opponent has 7 minions out, and you Bladestorm and it kills all 7 of them, you gain an armor for each, which is pretty cool. If it doesn't kill the minion, you don't still get a health, but it encourages you to set up specific boards so that you can gain armor with the hero power. I do think that putting all of that together is a lot, right? Like imagine you could do that repeatedly and you would gain an armor for each thing you killed every time, and it cost 1, that would be a pretty busted hero power, especially if we're pushing the cost of the card down to 6. So I think I do like the idea of it refreshing a lot. I do like the idea of it gaining some health when it kills something, and I think it healing when it uses its effect is a really important change that needs to be made, because warrior hero powers give you some armor. So maybe instead of getting an armor for each thing killed with it, you leave it at 2 mana and it refreshes whenever it kills something, and you gain 2 armor whenever it kills something. I think it's going to be hard to set up a bunch of armor gain that way, because it's still costing 2. That's a lot of a turn to spend just on using your hero power. But even then, that might be too broken to have at Garrosh at 6. So it's really tough to do everything I want to do to this card. So maybe we don't push it all the way to 6. Maybe we push it to just 7 and then it matches the other warrior hero cards that all cost 7. Let it refresh and gain 2 armor when it kills something. I think that'll be an interesting hero card and not too broken for Wild. This is one of the ones that I'm most happy to kind of push into playability, just because it's been the most useless since it came out, you know what I mean? So that was buffing all of the Death Knight hero cards from the Frozen Throne. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these changes, the type of changes you'd like to see to these cards, and let me know if you liked this type of video. I can already think of some other cycles that I would like to talk about, how I would buff them for Wild. Did you enjoy this? Do you have a cycle of your own that you'd like me to go through? Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel, and thank you so much for watching.